What if one night you stumbled upon an ATM that let you withdraw money? Unlimited, no questions asked, no guns, no hacks, just pure glitch. Would you walk away or take the money? Dan Saunders was an ordinary bartender from small town in Australia, earning $22 an hour, living paycheck to paycheck. But in 2011, after a night of drinking, he discovered banking loophole that turned him into an instant millionaire. Private jets, luxury suites, wild parties. He lived like royalty, all on money that technically wasn't his. But how long can you run from the truth when guilt starts knocking and the system finally catches up? Welcome to my YouTube channel, Once Upon a Crime, where we uncover true stories of forgotten people, unsolved mysteries, and unbelievable crimes. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so I can keep bringing you real stories that deserve to be told. Before he made headlines, Dan Saunders lived a life many would call ordinary. He was a bartender at the prestigious Crowne Plaza in Melbourne, pouring drinks for businessmen and tourists, blending into the background of luxury and nightlife. It was there, in that glittering world of high-stakes games and cocktail chatter, that Dan met someone who would change his path. Kind-hearted woman, religious education teacher. She was everything he wasn't. Spiritual, steady, but somehow they clicked. Their connection deepened, and when she decided to leave the bustling city behind to return to her hometown of Wangaratta, small quiet town in rural Australia, Dan made life-changing decision. He followed her, leaving Melbourne's casino lights and cocktail bars behind. He packed up and moved to Wangaratta, population 30,000, place far slower, simpler, and quieter. There, Dan tried to start anew, jumping from job to job, sometimes as cleaner, sometimes as waiter, until he finally landed spot at small local bar. He was trying to build life, to settle down, to be the man his partner believed in, but fate had other plans, and one night in 2011, that quiet life would spiral into something completely unexpected, all because of an ATM. It was just another night in 2011. After finishing a long shift behind the bar in Wangaratta, Dan Saunders decided to unwind the way he usually did, over drinks with his close friend Mark. The two caught up and shared laughs at nearby hotel bar, letting the night stretch on into the late hours. But as midnight crept in, Mark decided to call it night and headed home. Dan, however, wasn't ready to stop. He still wanted one more drink. Reaching into his wallet, Dan's mood shifted. Empty, no cash. Mark had already left and he was on his own. With no choice, Dan began to walk home. The streets were quiet, the air thick with the smell of rain, and then the skies opened. Sudden downpour drenched the small town, soaking in cold. Dan looked for shelter and spotted small covered structure, standalone ATM machine. He ducked under the awning for cover and wiped the rain from his face. That's when he noticed something. The ATM belonged to NAB, National Australia Bank, the same bank where he had an account. Out of habit, or maybe curiosity, he slipped his savings account card into the machine just to check if there was any balance left. Flicker of hope, maybe few dollars to transfer and keep the night going. Dan inserted his savings account card and checked the balance. Zero, not cent left. Still hoping to squeeze out one more drink, he tried checking his credit card. The screen showed $1,995 with $2,000 limit. That meant he only had $5 left to move. Not much, but maybe just enough. Feeling bit buzzed and running on impulse, Dan attempted to transfer $200 from his credit card to his savings. The machine rejected an incorrect transaction. It spit the card back out, but something about the situation felt odd, so he put his savings card back in just to check. The screen displayed balance unavailable. Curiosity took over. He attempted to withdraw $200, fully expecting the transaction to fail. But then something unbelievable happened. The machine whirred, and with soft click, it dispensed $200 in cash. Shocked but thrilled, Dan took his card and cashed $200 he technically didn't have and walked back to the bar like nothing happened. That night, the rain gave him more than shelter. It gave him secret. After a few more drinks, and just as he was about to head home, Dan couldn't shake the thought of that ATM, the glitch, the money. Curious and tempted, he decided to go back and try it again. He repeated the same steps as before, and once again it worked. That night, Dan walked away with a total of $2,000, withdrawn from an account that was technically empty. Dan went straight home and, still drunk, passed out as soon as he hit the bed. The next morning he woke up groggy. His memory of the night before felt hazy, almost like dream, but then he looked inside his wallet and the cash was still there. That's when the panic hit. He picked up the phone and called the bank, asking for the balance on both his savings and credit accounts. The response, still the same. Zero in his savings and $1,995 on his credit card. Instead of returning the money to the bank, Dan gave in to temptation. He went on a spontaneous shopping spree, buying things he normally couldn't afford. That night after work, he drank again, this time spending the rest of the cash like it was nothing. But reality came knocking the next day. He called the bank again, hoping maybe the glitch was still there, but this time his savings account was negative $2,000. The system had corrected itself. Just like that, Dan wasn't holding free money anymore. He was $2,000 in debt, without single clue how he'd pay it back. Dan went to work the next day, but his mind was somewhere else. He couldn't stop thinking about the ATM glitch. That's when theory hit him. It wasn't just what he did. It was when he did it. He realized that the system corrected itself only after a full day had passed, so if he were to try again, he had to act within specific window, between 12 midnight and 1 a.m. Later that night, after another round of drinks, Dan returned to the same ATM. It was just past midnight. First, he checked his savings account, still negative $2,000, then his credit card, unchanged at $1,995. He took chance, transferred $1,000 from his credit card to savings. He checked again. Now his savings was only negative $1,000. He transferred another $1,000. His savings balance hit zero. Then he made bold move. He transferred $2,000 from his credit card to savings. When he checked his balance, the screen displayed balance unavailable. Still, he went ahead and tried to withdraw the money, and just like that, the machine dispensed $2,000 in cash. The glitch still worked. Back at his apartment, with $2,000 in his wallet, Dan began to piece together a plan. He realized something critical. If he skipped a night, the bank system might catch up. The glitch seemed to reset or correct itself within 24 hours, so he needed to keep making transfers every single night to stay ahead of detection. He formed a strategy. If he transferred $8,000, he figured $4,000 would cancel out his negative balance, and the remaining $4,000 he could withdraw and spend. To justify what he was doing, Dan created his own narrative. He was a modern-day Robin Hood, stealing from the rich, giving to the poor, and in this story he was the poor, but instead of giving to charity, the money flowed into nights of heavy drinking, wild bar tabs, and horse race bets with his friends. What started as glitch was fast becoming lifestyle. Dan's friends had started asking questions. Where was all the money coming from? The nightly drinks, the bets, the generosity. It didn't add up, but Dan always gave the same answer. I've been winning at the horse races. To most it seemed like stroke of luck, but something felt off. Then one day, Dan walked into the bar and saw the owner on the phone. On the other end of the line, a betting administrator. They had warning. Large bettor had been placing unusually high wagers at the bar's betting terminal. It could be Sam, they said. The bar owner, nervous, he immediately checked the bar safe, but everything was still there. Nothing was missing. Dan said nothing, but deep inside he knew things were starting to spiral out of control. The warning from the betting administrator changed everything. Fearing for his bar's reputation and not wanting to be tied to anything illegal, the bar owner made decision. Dan was fired. No warning, no second chance, just firm explanation. I can't be associated with you as something shady is going on. But that wasn't all. Dan was also banned from betting on horse races in small town like Wangaratta. Bad news travels fast. The whispers reach everyone, including the woman he loved. Without even asking for an explanation, his fiancée broke up with him over text message. Soon the friends who once drank and laughed with him disappeared too. All except one, Mark. Dan, now isolated and spiraling, told Mark the truth. Where the money really came from. Mark paused, then gave quiet reply. I don't care, mate, just don't tell me anymore. It was loyalty, but also sign that even his closest friend didn't want to get involved. Dan was now truly alone, armed with dangerous secret and broken heart. With no job, no fiancé, and the town turning against him, Dan clung to the only friend he had left, Mark. In a moment of reckless thrill, he offered Mark something irresistible. Let's get out of here. Let's go on vacation. My treat. The destination? Crown Plaza, where Dan once worked behind the bar. Now he was checking into luxurious suite, ordering champagne instead of serving it, living like high roller. They played in the casino, drank at the bar, and lived days with no clocks, just light spits and bottomless glasses. For a brief moment, Dan felt untouchable, but the high couldn't last forever. Few days later, reality called. Mark packed his bag and said his goodbye. I got to head back. Wangaratta, I have work tomorrow. And just like that, Dan was alone again, surrounded by luxury, but haunted by how quickly it was all slipping through his fingers. Dan Saunders had pushed the ATM to its limits, but there was one thing he couldn't do: withdraw large sums all at once. He was tired of taking out $2,000 a night. He wanted more, faster. So one morning, armed with courage and nerves of steel, Dan walked into branch of the National Australia Bank. He stepped up to the counter, heart pounding in his chest. "Hi, I'd like to withdraw $1,000 from my savings account," he told teller, trying to keep his voice steady. He braced himself, but to his surprise, the transaction went through smoothly. No questions, no flags, just the sound of bills being counted and handed over. Dan exhaled. That moment changed everything. Now he knew he could do this over the counter, so he pushed it further. Few days later, dressed sharp and confident, he returned to the same branch with requests no ordinary customer would make. "I'd like to withdraw $100,000, please." The teller froze for a moment, blinked, and said, "One moment, sir. I'll need to check with the manager." Dan nodded, forcing a smile, but inside he was burning with tension. 15 minutes passed. Each second felt like an hour. He was sure the police were going to show up, or worse, the manager would return with questions he couldn't answer. But then the teller came back, in her hands stack of bills, crisp, neatly packed. "Here you go, sir, $100,000. Dan took the money, nodded his thanks, and walked out. Man holding more cash than he ever dreamed of, thanks to broken system that had yet to notice. But with every win came shadow. 'Cause Dan knew you can't cheat the system forever, and eventually the system always fights back. Now living alone in Melbourne and flush with cash from his nightly ATM exploits, Dan Saunders felt the emptiness creeping in. Money could buy drinks, hotels, and freedom, but it couldn't buy connection. So he picked up the phone and called his only remaining friend, Mark. "Come back to Melbourne. Let's have another vacation," Dan said. This time Mark brought two more friends with him. They checked in at Crown Plaza, but they weren't just there to stay. They were there to live. Large, fine dining every night, designer clothes, shopping sprees, helicopter rides to out-of-town gourmet restaurants, limousines to take them around Melbourne like rock stars. And when the night fell, they hit the casino floor like high rollers. To Dan, it felt like a dream he could finally share, and at one point he almost told them about the ATM glitch, the secret behind it all. Maybe I should tell them," he said to Mark. But Mark, loyal yet cautious, shook his head. "They don't need to know. Let them enjoy it. Just let it be." And so Dan kept the secret to his friends. He was just lucky, maybe rich, maybe silent investor. Then he was man living on borrowed time, funded by glitch the world hadn't caught yet. After nearly 5 months of living like the ghost in the machine, Dan Saunders made a decision. One last night, he whispered to himself, no more games, no more transfers, no more withdrawals. It would end the way it began, quietly in the dark. But before he stepped away, he made one final move, his biggest yet. He gathered his friends and told them the truth. "This money, it's not mine, but tonight it's yours." He offered to clear their student loans, off their debts, or hand them cold, hard cash. It was his way of being Robin Hood one last time. That night he went all in. The total amount he had withdrawn since the glitch began, $1.6 million. When the night ended, so did the ride. The hotel suite grew silent. His friends went home, and Dan was alone again. This time not in bar, but in luxurious cage lined with fear. He sat still, waiting for the morning, and the call came. Telephone receiver ring. On the line was bank manager, Kurt, cold, calculated. "We've discovered discrepancy," as the voice said. "Your account is overdrawn by $1.6 million. We're contacting the authorities." No more glitch, no more loophole, just Dan and the weight of what he had done. Dan Saunders waited. After the call from the bank, he thought the police would be at his door within minutes. He stayed in his hotel suite, heart racing at every knock, every phone ring, every sound from the hallway. But no one came. No handcuffs, no officers, no squad cars waiting outside Crown Plaza. Just more phone calls. Day after day, the bank called him. Stern, threatening, relentless. "Return the money. We're sending the police. You're going to jail." But still, no one showed up. Dan didn't know what to believe anymore. Was this trap? tests, or were they waiting for him to crack on his own? Meanwhile, his money was running out. The luxury he once bathed in became burdened. The five-star hotel, the casino nights, the high-end dinners. Now all just debts with no returns. Unable to afford the nightly raid at Crown Plaza, Dan packed his bags, called for taxi, and returned to the one place that felt familiar, Wangar, a small, quiet town. But this time he wasn't the same bartender with dream. He was man hiding in plain sight, carrying the weight, $1.6 million, and waiting for the past to finally catch up. Dan waited for months, then year. Then two, still no police, no court dates, no arrests, only the daily calls from the bank filled with threats, but no real consequences. It was driving him mad. How can someone steal $1.6 million and not be arrested? So Dan did something unthinkable. He called the press. He told them everything, the glitch, the withdrawals, the casino nights, the limousines, the lies. He wanted pressure from the public, from the media, to force the bank's hand, and it worked. Sort of. His story made it to the news. People were shocked, amused, intrigued, but still no police, just more phone calls, just more threats, until one day Dan contacted TV News Network asking if they'd be interested in telling the whole story. They filmed, they interviewed, they pieced together the incredible tale of the man who outsmarted an ATM system. When the show was finally ready, the network invited Dan to watch the premiere at their studio. Dan arrived, strange mix of pride and anxiety. He sat in the front row watching his own story unfold on screen, and then the twist. In the final minutes of the broadcast, the reporter's voice turned serious. Authorities have confirmed warrant of arrest has been issued for Dan Saunders. He is now officially considered fugitive. The lights in the studio turned on. Police were already waiting right then and there. Dan Saunders was arrested inside the TV station. He was handcuffed, led out of the studio, and brought straight to the police station, where he was finally jailed years after he first withdrew that mysterious $200. After his dramatic arrest at the TV station, Dan Saunders was assigned a public defender. But what the lawyer discovered shocked even him. There was no arrest warrant, no formal complaint, no active investigation. The arrest was all for show. The bank, NAB, had never filed official charges. They had never reported Dan to the police. Everything was bluff. Why? Because Dan had accidentally uncovered critical flaw in the bank's system. Glitch that allowed funds to appear available even when they weren't. Glitch that, if exposed to the public, could destroy customer confidence and trigger massive financial losses. The bank wanted it buried, quiet, forgotten. But Dan had gone public. He had confessed everything on national television. So despite the bank's refusal to press charges or testify, the state had no choice but proceed. The prosecutor picked up the case, but without the bank's cooperation, no technical details could be brought to light, no expert witnesses, no deep forensic investigation. In the end, the court had only one thing, Dan's televised confession, and so the judgment was handed down. 1 year in prison, no millions recovered, no scandal fully uncovered. Dan served his sentence quietly, and when he walked free, he wasn't bitter. Instead, he became something of cult figure. He appeared on TV interviews, podcasts, and even began writing a book about his bizarre journey from bartender to accidental millionaire to glitch in the system. This is the astonishing, unbelievable, and very real story of Dan Saunders, the man who found crack in the financial world and walked right through it.